We're going to talk briefly today about secrets and how we all have them and how we all kind of wear masks. And we have this on-again, off-again series here at Daylight called Words You Ain't Never Heard. And words you ain't never heard are words in other languages that people in English don't understand. And so you've probably heard the fact that Eskimos have 100 words for snow. And, you know, for each typical type of snow, for icy snow, there's one word. For slushy snow, there's others. And in languages across the globe, there's words that we don't have. And there's this word in German called Kummerspeck. And Kummerspeck, has anybody ever seen the video online about how Germans say words compared to other languages? Anybody ever seen that? It's fantastic. So in English, it's ambulance. In French, it's like ambulancia. And in German, it's Krankenwagen. So they have Kummerspeck, and Kummerspeck literally translates as grief bacon. And grief bacon is the weight that you put on when you're in mourning, or the weight that you put on when you're sad. And so there's probably a German word for weight put on during COVID. I'm going to show you a picture, and I want you to guess what the word is. It's gigil. What do you think gigil means? Adorable or cute. It's kind of like that. It's a Tagalog word from the Philippines, and it means like overwhelming cuteness. And it's kind of like must hug. Must hug the cute is kind of what gigil means. Must hug the cute. And then in Indonesia, they have this word menjelek. And menjelek, you know the game where you walk past somebody and you tap them on the shoulder and they turn and look, but you're already on the other side? They have a name for it. It's called menjelek. And I've seen Paul Lyle do this to his kids all the time. He taps them on the shoulder. When they turn to look, then he puts his finger here, and when they look back, that's my favorite. But they have a word for that. It's menjelek. And the word we're talking about today is another German word. It's called Binenleben. And Binenleben is like, there we go. Good job. Binenleben is kind of this secret self. It wraps up with self-concept and ambition and all kinds of stuff. And I've heard it defined like this, is that the Binenleben is the sort of unuttered inner atmosphere in which one's consciousness dwells alone with the secrets of its prison house. And it's kind of like this idea the Germans understand that nobody really gets you. Nobody really gets me. Like only I have a pretty good idea of what goes on in here, and even I maybe don't get it completely. And so it's the fact that everybody wears a mask and everybody has secrets, and no matter how hard you try to be known, you will never be known. Binenleben, it's the secret self. And it touches on all of these, but none of these quite do it justice. That's why it's a word you ain't never heard. It kind of encompasses all of them. There's a particular nuance to Binenleben that this whole list falls short of, and it sums up something else. But this list kind of fits in there and ties in with it. It's self-worth and ambition and your values and what your real morals and ethics are, because you can look good without actually being good. And so there's the reality of what goes on in your inner life as far as your ethics and morality. What shames you? What are your lusts and your loves, your fears, your feelings, your thoughts, your pride and your regrets? And let's face it, none of us really understand this list about ourselves, much less the person sitting next to us today. And so the Binenleben is like the reality of all that, some amalgamation of everything you are on the inside it's secret. It's secret to us, it's secret to everyone else. And Scripture often talks about secrets, that we all have secrets. And this is just one of many passages that seems to know God understands the Binenleben. He gets you. When you don't get you, He gets you. And oftentimes we read this as kind of a scary thing. And hopefully, you know, like Big Brother is watching. And hopefully by the end of today, we'll have a different perspective on it. But God recognizes that we all wear masks. I was at Trinity University in Dublin, Ireland one year, and we were with a team, and it was a drama team and missionaries, and we went out in front of Trinity, and we were street preaching and performing dramas. There's this place where 6 roads meet. They meet like this, and there's a crosswalk with a red light, and so people, like en masse, hundreds of people have to stop at the crosswalk, and then they pass the road, and then they stop at that crosswalk and pass the road. So at any time, there's an audience of 400 out in front of Trinity University. And so we were street preaching and doing a drama. And the drama we were doing was called The Mask. And it's a video reenactment of how people put on masks and act a particular way. So like one guy puts on a mask and now he's a headbanging heavy metal guy. And one guy puts on a mask and he's a dancer. And one guy puts on a mask and he's partying with his friends or whatever. You become someone else when you put on the mask. And I noticed, I wasn't part of the drama, if I remember right, and I noticed at that time that there were three guys that looked like college students sitting on a bench nearby. And as soon as it started, they become really animated. Like they were looking at each other like, whoa, what is going on here? Like they were kind of tripping out. And then I got up and preached about the masks that we wear and how God sees the real self and how we can take the masks off, and talked about our true identity in Christ. And they were just flipping out, and they were riveted. And I thought, man, I'm a great preacher, but this is kind of ridiculous. And so we approached them afterwards and said, okay, what the heck is going on here? Why are you guys so into this? And they said, you're not going to believe this, but we're on assignment from one of our classes right now, and we're supposed to go out and observe people and write up this paper on the masks that we wear. They'd been sent out of their class to examine the masks people wear, and then they showed up and we're preaching about masks we wear. And God is interested in the real you. He's interested in the masks. He's interested in the process. He's interested in the Binenleben. He's interested in all of it. And that was just one moment in my life where it felt like God was taking the mask off a little bit and showing some transparency that he was actually involved and actually moving. But we all hide ourselves. And you guys maybe have seen Impractical Jokers. The only applause I'll get today is I put these guys on the screen. And it's one. Hey. They're actually funny. They really are. And they do this bit. So if you don't know Impractical Jokers, they'll be in situations where their friends are in their ears and mics, and they have to say what their friends say. They'll be serving coffee, but they're only allowed to say what their friends say in the back room. And some of it's very funny stuff. And one of the bits that they do is called the dating service, or Am I Dateable? And so Joe, who is the second from the right there, the guy in the whitish shirt, sits at a park bench or a coffee shop or whatever, and he's got his computer out in front of him, and he approaches a stranger. He says, hey, I'm working on my dating profile here. Could you help me out and tell me if it's any good or not? And they'll say, yeah, sure. So he says, okay, here's what I've written. And the only thing he's allowed to say is what his friends have written in his dating profile. So you can see the possibilities here, the potential for humor. And so his self-summary in this dating profile: they removed a lump from me, and now everything flows as it should. The most private thing I'm willing to admit: I left a man for dead in a cave once. And you can see the people are like, they're really trying to be nice, but they're like, maybe you shouldn't say that, right? And then at the end, they're supposed to say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how great is my dating profile? How dateable am I? And they get a number. And then one of the other contestants does the same thing, and they get a number, and whoever gets the highest number is the winner for the day, and whoever loses has to perform some terribly embarrassing stunt at the end of the show. So he says, how dateable am I? And she's being very, very kind at this point, because he's left somebody for dead at this point. She says, you're a 5. and of course, the guys in the back are like, oh, they feel like they've been defeated, because a 5 is a really good number for this dating profile. And then Joe says this. He says, I've got some work to do, clearly. And she responds, yeah, you've got a lot of work to do. And so here's what I want to ask is do you feel like she was saying, yeah, you've got a lot of work to do on yourself? Or was she saying you've got a lot of work to do on your profile? Probably the profile. Because we all, if we do a dating profile, if I do a dating profile and I say, you know, I've been accused of cutting my toenails in bed and piling the toenails on the nightstand next to me and leaving those toenails for days until my wife finally said, clean them up, that probably changes your perspective of me, and you'd say that dating profile is not solid, right? And so we don't want. Yeah, the wife. I mean, I'm not saying that's a real event. That is a real event that occurred in my life. I'm just saying. We work on the profile often, and the person a little bit. Shut it. The Bible teaches that we ought to have secrets, that there's good stuff that we do that should be hidden from the world, and then it also teaches about how there ought to be stuff that the world ought to see, and it's kind of this strange mix. Jesus called the religious leaders of his time hypocrites. He said, you're like whitewashed tombs which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones. We talked about dead men and how God can bring anything back to life. But Jesus was saying, you look really holy and righteous, but what's going on the inside, the Binenleben, there ain't nothing pretty about it. But then he also says things like when you fast and when you pray and when you give, you should do these things in secret, and your Father who sees you in secret will reward you in secret. And so he paints this picture that the Binenleben could be really beautiful or it could be really dry and ugly, and there's kind of no way to tell from the outside. But we should have a secret life. Everybody does have a secret life. It's what does that secret life look like? My friend Andrew Lutz practices Ugly Selfie Day once a year on March 27th, I think, or May 27th. It comes up pretty quick. And this is his... I mean, he's a good-looking dude, and he's not a very good-looking dude all at the same time, right? I mean, that's what you see when you see this picture. And we've talked recently, and these are both Andrew. I mean, this is him, and I texted him and showed him that I was showing this morning, so I have permission to do it. But we've talked recently about how we're all beautiful and defiled. And then sometimes I lay in bed at night and I think, who's the real me? Is it the ugly selfie? Is it the calm, cool, collected dude? Whatever I try to present to people or make myself look holier. I act like I'm way more busy than I am. Am I actually busy, or is that a show? Or like who is the real me? The Binenleben or like the shell? And so the Binenleben tends to be the reality. And I've been asking the question, what if I let people see? Like, what if I let people see the ugly in me? My ugly selfie day, what if it showed up? What if when I took pictures, if I took it from, instead of up here, down here, and everybody saw my double chin? But I mean that kind of non-literally, is if they could see my double chin, my ugliness, and like how would people respond? And probably in the room there's people that you feel like you lead a double life, like you just couldn't possibly let people know what goes on in your head or what you've done or who you've been or where you've come from. And I just want to drop a hint here that we all lead double lives, that you're not alone. And all of us have times when we lay in bed and think, I'm pretty ugly. And all of us have times where we present ourselves as prettier than we are. I took this picture this week in my office, and this is the mantle. I have a fireplace in my office, and this is where the dishes collect. And so just a moment of transparency here is that I'll eat at my desk, and then when they pile up, I'll move them to the mantle, and then I'll slowly move them. I say slowly, like slowly move them from the mantle to the kitchen, or I'll take them two at a time, or sometimes... But I'll tell you this, if Ernesto comes over to visit and he's going to hang out in my office, guess what I do? Those dishes are gone. And why do I do that? It's because I want him, I subconsciously want him to think I've got it all together, that my desk is always perfectly in order, that my office is always clean. I'll probably dust that mantle when he's on his way over too. And we all do it. It's just a reality that we try to put our best foot forward, that we do our best to show ourselves in our lives as uncluttered as possible. And the reality is that we're all hypocrites. That we want to blame other people for being hypocrites. We use that label and we use it like as a powerful attack on someone. But we have to face off with the fact that all of us are hypocrites. Hypocrites comes from the Greek hypocritai. And a hypocritai is an actor under a mask. It means what you see on the outside isn't the full reality of what you see on the inside. And I think it's fair to say of all of us that there are reasons that we're going to discuss in just a moment that we all present a case that isn't always real. We always show something that isn't true. And so I'm asking the question, why not? Why don't we show up? Why don't we let the truth come out? Why do we use filters on our selfies? And I mean that metaphorically as well, is we just constantly, we're showing a life that's filtered, that we're trying to put our best foot forward. And I think part of it is nobody wants to be that guy, and that guy is gender neutral. I consider a guy, I say, hey guys, and I can say, hey guys to girls, and so whatever gender you embrace here, you don't want to be that guy. Nobody wants to be the guy that when you say, hey, how's it going? Tell me about yourself. And the first thing out of your mouth is, well, I hate my job. Or my office is cluttered, or I've never quite gotten along with my mother, or we don't want to bring out the ugly stuff. We put our best foot forward and we say, this is who I am, and this is how I work, and this is about my family, and here's 5 bullet points that make me seem great. That's what we do because nobody wants to be Debbie or Dan Downer all the time. Nobody wants to be the one who brings the mood down all the time. And so we're kind of afraid of doing that. So there's like this holy, loving reason why we kind of don't put our reality out there. But what I really want to just address today is the fact that we have these rejection and acceptance factors that go on. When I asked Andrew, I texted him and I showed him the picture I was using. I said, here's sermon prep this week. I'm laughing pretty hard. And he said, ugly selfie day is coming up soon. And then the last thing he says, that picture on the left is how I got my wife. The picture on the right would not have landed him a wife. So they met on a dating service, and his dating profile had that picture on the left, and she was like, ooh la la, right? I mean, she jumped in. So when you're trying to be attractive, when you're trying to be accepted and not rejected, we feel it's important to put our best foot forward and often hide the Binenleben. We hide the reality of our turmoil and our struggles and our difficulties and our lusts and our prejudices and all the stuff that we really hope nobody will ever see. And it's because of rejection and acceptance. We want to be accepted. We don't want to be rejected. I read this week. It says, we all present ourselves as more attractive, more moral, and better kept together than we really are. It's a socially acceptable form of semi-deception that every person shares. And they went on, and this is slightly related. It says, we want to be fully unique in the best of ways while being fully the same in the best of ways. So we can't ever be fully us, different and the same in the best and the worst of ways. And so I think there's the reason we do it is rejection acceptance factors and not wanting to be that guy. But then I also want to add this addendum that when it comes to church, there's this communal thing that we're hungering for. There's this community that we want. And then we tie that with a sort of performance theology that comes up in church that says, you better add up. And so oftentimes, as this will unfold, the idea is we have to present ourselves in a particular way in order to be accepted, in order to be loved. And the acceptance and love is what we're hungering for so desperately. And so church becomes this strange place where you walk in the door and somebody says, hey, welcome to Daylight Church, here's your mask. Welcome to Daylight Church, or welcome to First Baptist Church, here's your mask. Or welcome to Second Methodist Church, here's your mask. And church tends to be this place where we distribute masks and expect people to wear them because we have to maintain this particular way of looking at things. And I don't want Daylight Church to be a mask distribution agency at all. I want it to be a place where the Binenleben can show, and we can all be in that together. I didn't know what I wanted to preach on this week. Until Thursday, I hadn't even narrowed this thing down. I was lost, and I wrote a friend and said, I need something easy. But I started thinking about secrets, and something came up about secrets, and I've always wanted to talk about secrets anyway. And I wrote down, for some reason, when I wrote down secrets, I wrote down the downfall of Ravi Zacharias in my notes when I was brainstorming on what to talk about this Sunday. The next morning, I'm a member of a news online service called Medium, where authors write and then they send you a list that they think will interest you. The first thing that popped up in my email was this article called The Downfall of Ravi Zacharias. And for those of you, and I told my friend that I had been texting, I said, this is either Big Brother or Big Father, and I'm having a hard time figuring out which, but it felt like a Big Father moment, like God was saying, okay, this is what I want you to talk about. And whether it was or wasn't, that's what I'm rolling with. But for those of you that don't know Ravi Zacharias, he's a prolific author and apologist, and a year ago, most of Christian culture that was in the know would have described him as one of the greatest teachers in Christian history, especially in terms of apologetics. And he was very gentle, appearing as a very God-loving guy, very compassionate, very merciful, and an incredible defender of the faith because he was the kind of guy that was so gentle when he spoke that he could get away with saying anything, and people would listen. He was like the Gandhi of Christian apologetics. I mean, just a very gentle, peace-loving sort of guy. And I want to quote a passage from a book that he wrote called Living the Faith That We Defend. He says, I have little doubt that the single greatest obstacle to the impact of the gospel has not been its inability to provide answers, but the failure on our part to live it out. And those of you that know the story know that Ravi had a dark secret life that has been exposed since his passing. He died of cancer last year in the fall. And since then, there were some accusations of impropriety in his life that had been kind of buried, and everybody said, well, they've been investigated and they're not true. This is just a person trying to milk him for money. It's a money grubber, and it's just not true. And There were some questions of him saying that he was a doctorate when he actually had honorary doctorates, but he would just describe himself as PhD. So there were some integrity questions, and ultimately, post-mortem, they finally hired an independent investigation team that said go do an investigation, and they found out that, and he would refuse to turn his phone over for examination to his organization, and they just kind of gave him a free pass because he was the Gandhi of Christian apologetics. He was Ravi Zacharias, and very gentle defender of the faith, and these were obviously people trying to ruin his ministry, and so they didn't call him to task on it. But after he was dead, they found hundreds of pictures of women in his phone, some of which, or many of which, were nude. They found very credible sources saying that he had molested and touched in sexual ways women, that he got regular massages, and he got a free pass because he was Ravi Zacharias, and he owned 2 massage agencies. And in one case, there's an accusation of rape and other accusations that I don't talk about in good society, but it all turned out to be credible. And so after death, all this stuff came out. And it's ugly, and it's hard, and you look at it and say, how could the Binenleben be so corrupt and nobody know? I mean, that mask was solid. The mask he was wearing was solid. And so we see that, and we cry out, hypocritai. He was an actor wearing a mask. Now, where does he stand with God, and is there mercy for Ravi Zacharias? I don't want to speculate on that, but the author of this article asks these questions. He says, where did he get his mask? Where did he learn to act? Without condoning his behavior in the slightest, I propose that Ravi Zacharias learned these skills from the church itself. And so when we talk about how church can be like this place where you hand people a mask at the door, like at what point in Ravi's life did he hide? He may have been a scoundrel his whole life, and he may have been corrupt and taking advantage of people his whole life, and I don't want to say that that's not the reality, but I do want to say that we have to be careful. The church is a community. It's an ecclesia, and in the Greek, it's church. When we think church, we think of a building where people go, and the people going is actually the ecclesia. Ecclesia means the gathering, so it's the gathering of folks. So an ecclesia, a church, is a gathering of people. It's a community. And so because we're communally based, then there's also this idea of, like, what are the boundaries where you can or cannot be into the community? And for many churches, and I hope and pray that Daylight Church we'll get away from this type of measuring, but there's mental measuring first off, and there's this idea that you have to believe particular truths to be a part of our particular ecclesia. And that can be views on the atonement, penal substitution, it can be views on sexuality, it can be views on baptism. There's just all kinds of views that people will say, these are the lines that our church draws. It could be on the virgin birth or the inerrancy of Scripture or the 7 days of creation or whatever, some kind of eschatology. It's like, this is what our group believes. And therefore, if you're going to be a part of our community, you're expected to believe these things. And they may give lip service to free thinking. They may give lip service to say, yeah, you can think what you want and explore what you want. But a lot of churches don't mean it. And so the author of this article, he says, you'll quickly find yourself frozen out if you begin to question certain things. There have been so many people come through Daylight Church and show up here that they were just exploring, and their church asked them to go away. There have been small group leaders that asked the wrong question at the wrong time, and they were asked to no longer be a small group leader because they were stirring up controversy. And all they were doing is asking questions. And our author says this, he says, most of us care so much about belonging that we suppress and bury these uneasy feelings for the sake of fitting in. So you're not allowed to question, you're not allowed to think. And so there's this mental measurement that occurs. And that of course, means hiding the Binenleben. It means hiding what you actually think because you want to fit in. And then there's this moral measuring, and the author says this, and I get how this is a point of contention, but he says, good Christians don't cuss, don't drink, don't get angry, definitely don't engage in premarital sexual activity, and pretty much don't sin. Good Christians are always patient, always generous. Notice these words, always patient, always generous, always loving, and above all, always nice. And this is a perspective that this author has. And there's a little bit of church bashing here that I'm uncomfortable with, but the reality is that we do kind of draw these moral lines and say, this is how our group is expected to behave. And there's not a lot of room for a journey in that. There's not a lot of room for growth. There's not a lot of room. I remember Brian Head Welch, who was a member of the band Korn, became a believer and a follower of Jesus. And I saw some really beautiful moments with him on stage. It just really felt like the Holy Spirit was active in his life. But then he did this music video where these sexy ladies were half naked and they're licking drugs off each other's bellies. And it's a Christian song with a Christian meaning about the depth of depravity that drugs will take you. But the church was in an uproar saying he's supposed to be a believer now. And there was no allowing to move from corn to Jesus and a journey in between. It was like you're either in or you're out. And I don't want to be that kind of church. I want to be a church where there's room for a journey. And then the author says this. He says, parishioners are subjected to weekly sermons, which and I know I'm guilty of this. And some of it's necessary. Some of it's important. But when you boil them down, they're simply a message of condemnation. You're doing it wrong. Get better. Do this more. Do this less. Have more faith. And so on. And let's face it. That's kind of the expectation, is that when a minister gets up, he's going to tell you an area you can improve. But we don't want to say until you like you've got to have it all together to be in. And that's where the church fails, is we're saying you've got to cross these lines. You've got to believe these things. You've got to act this particular way if you're going to be a part of us, instead of letting people come in and let the Binenleben show, and like having a value of transparency and considering transparency a virtue, because that's honesty. We're not real big advocates of honesty in the church a lot of times. One author wrote a book called Who You Are When No One Is Looking. Choosing consistency and resisting compromise. We will occupy a right and wonderful world only when God's values occupy our lives. So the author said this, and I have lost. Anybody recognize this guy? He was the lead pastor of Willow Creek Church, Bill Hybels, and he wrote that book, Who You Are When No One's Looking, choosing consistency over compromise. And he made that statement that this is when the world comes together, is when God's values occupy our lives. And if you know the downfall of Bill Hybels, you know that it was a pretty ugly situation, and there were a lot of accusations of impropriety and a lot of accusations of foul and controlling leadership. But you can bet that he got up and preached sermons that said, let's improve, let's do better, and it's a mask. It's hypocrisy. It's an actor on a stage, and the church has often been guilty of it. And we find ourselves in this place where we don't measure up, but we want in. And so because we want in, then we feel like we have to put on our mask when we walk through the doors, and we have to put on our mask when we're at our small group. And there's like this natural cultural thing where we want to hide things anyway, but then when there's such hard battle lines drawn, it amplifies that even more. And I'm not at all trying to say that your life shouldn't change or that Jesus doesn't transform, because I believe he does. But I don't want to make it a boundary line for how much you've been transformed as to whether or not you can be a part of the family. That's where I think things get messed up. The author says this. He says, the church is not a safe place to come clean, to share doubts, to confess sin, to question, to admit that one has got it wrong. It's not even a great place to find forgiveness. He says to do something as brave as confessing one's sins in the church would be akin to placing oneself before a firing squad and hoping for the best. Why would anyone want to be real in a church when their very sense of belonging is at stake? And what we find is that we can't perform up to expectations. I believe that's a universal truth, is that none of us are like God and none of us can ever be like God. And as we try to emulate Christ and we try to be conformed to the image of Christ, none of us will ever be Christ. And so we can't ever be Christ. We can't ever perform to that standard. And so instead we perform to that standard. We can't ever actively actually be as holy and righteous as we're supposed to be. And so we put on a mask and we don't let people in. And so we turn into actors breeding actors. And again, I'm not bashing the church universal or our church. I'm just saying that, like how do we do this? How do we avoid a situation like Ravi's, where he wrote one of his, he texted, there's lots of damning texts in Ravi's, that were found in Ravi's phone, but he wrote to one woman, he says, if you betray me here, I will have no option but to bid this world goodbye, I promise. This was way into his ministry. The Gandhi of Christian apologetics, I mean, the Pope, he's saying, I'm going to kill myself if the Binenleben gets out. He had gotten so deep and so hidden that he was so afraid that he was threatening suicide to the person that threatened to expose him. Now, I don't want to say, again, I don't want to imply at all that his behavior is worth condoning at all, because it's not. And he may have just been a scoundrel with a wicked heart the whole time. There's no way to know. But I think the author of the article asks a good question of, was there a breaking point for Ravi? Was there a point where he could have gone to a friend and said, hey, I'm really struggling with temptation here? Like was there a pre-moment, a pre-fall moment where he could have had a friend that he trusted, that he could have exposed the Binenleben and said, here's what's going on with me. I know you think I'm the Pope. I know you think that I'm some super righteous dude, but I'm having a real hard time here. Or is there a part where he could have said, I have a sex addiction, because everything that's been shown shows that he did? Like could he have exposed, was there a point when he could have exposed that to a friend or to his leadership council or his staff? And even after the rape and the molestations and all the terrible things that you can read about online if you so choose, but like at some point, couldn't he have come clean and said, I've done a terrible thing? But instead, he's saying, I will kill myself before I ever let it be known. And part of that had to have been because of this community that he had built, this ministry that he had built, his fear of the devastation, the fear of his reputation, all of this stuff. And it's because the church is not equipped or good at saying, let it out, let it show, and we'll work with you and we'll help. And so the really, really terrible part of this story is that this actor's stage hurts the victims too, because there were people who were trying to say that Ravi did this to me, or Ravi acted like this every time I was around him, or Ravi this or Ravi that. And because he was viewed as like the gold standard of Christianity, like we have to safeguard our boundaries. And so victims were damaged and hurt through this whole thing. The one victim who early on spoke out about Ravi said this. This is why she didn't speak out earlier. She says, I really did not want to hurt the church. See that? The victim has been harmed because of this sense of this communal thing and this perfection theology, being bedmates. She says, I didn't want to hurt the church. I felt like if this was exposed, this fantastic place would blow up. And I loved the church. I loved the people there. I loved the family. Hear that? It was the community and the community's boundaries and guidelines that kept me silent. I didn't want to hurt anybody, and I was ashamed. So here's the question for us and for me as a pastor and for you when it comes to church is, how do we church? Like how do you have a church where we say, yes, Christ is the standard. We want to look like Christ. We want to be conformed to the image of Christ. He is heads and tails above where we are morally. He's heads and tails as far as a character, as communication, as far as every aspect of our lives. Like it's this standard that's unreachable, and yet we aspire to him. But how do we create a church where people can walk that journey in safety, where the Binenleben can come out, where people can, even right now, probably in the room, there's people that think, no way, no how would I ever let anyone know about whatever the thing is. I even have some stuff like that in my life that I've shared with my wife, I've shared with my therapist, that I've thought about sharing with you guys, and I can't bring myself to do it. And maybe it's because I just don't feel safe. Maybe I feel like rejection will be the answer. And how do we create a culture where that's not the reality, where people can come out, so to speak, and allow the truth about the Binenleben to be known? I heard an older saint, he was in his 70s, talking about his religious journey, and he said, everything we built was out of insecurity. He was saying, everything I did, it was because I was trying to add up, because I felt like I didn't add up. And that's not the relationship with God that I think he wants. And so we need to fight against that. And so here at Daylight, we're trying to create a culture where no question is off the table. Those mental boundaries, those belief systems where you have to hide what you really think, or hide where your doubts are, hide where your questions are, or you must conform to this vision of creation, or this vision of baptism, or this vision of sanctification. We're trying to say that's not the reality here. This is a safe place to ask questions. And I think that's an important part. I have an atheist friend that always wonders why Christians emphasize believing over being. Meaning, they say you have to accept this truth. You have to recite the Apostles' Creed and say, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit. And this is how you are a Christian, is because of what you believe, not who you are. And my atheist friends don't understand that concept. And I think it's It's a legitimate complaint against Christianity, is that being a follower of Jesus is simply that. He's leading, I'm behind, I'm following. Doesn't mean I have everything mentally in line, that everything's perfect upstairs. And then there's belonging over behavior, is that we are Christ's. So when the early church became followers of Jesus, when they became Christians, where they were first called at Antioch, they were called Christians, which means Christ follower or disciple of Christ. They didn't have it all together. They didn't have the book of Romans to look at. They didn't have the book of Hebrews to look at. They thought a lot differently about the world than we think about it today, and yet they were following the rabbi. And so I want to be a church where we encourage following over conforming to some particular behavior, which isn't to say behavior isn't important. I also want transparency to be a virtue, because let's face it, transparency equals honesty, and honesty is a virtue. This doesn't mean you air your dirty laundry in front of everybody, but it does mean that there are safe places where you can and still be loved. And that ultimately brings me to my conclusion for today, and I'm going to continue on this next week on how we as individuals kind of break the mask. How do we get rid of the mask entirely and live honestly out in front of people? But one of the things I want us to understand today is that there's a different understanding of Big Brother. You know, earlier I read this passage that God knows the secrets of the heart, and some of us think, oh no, I hope that's not true, right? I don't want anybody to know me that deeply, and it's scary that Big Brother would be out there. But Luke 8 says, nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest. Listen to this. This is how we read it. Nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest. Ha 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 ha. Nor is anything secret that will not be made known and come to light. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark shall be heard in the light, and what you have whispered in private rooms shall be proclaimed in the housetops. And we think, oh no, God is watching me. He's going to lay the boom down on me because he knows all my secrets, and one day all my secrets are going to be exposed. And I just think there's a better way of reading it. So I want us to be a church that turns from that turns this concept that I am known, that my secrets are exposed, that my actions and my life and my characteristics will be brought to light, from oh no to oh yeah. Because here's the reality. What these passages mean is, well, let me say it like this, and I'll close. We all deeply want to be known, but we all deeply fear being known. We all want so badly for somebody to accept us as we are, to see the real us and love us anyway. And that's what these passages say. They say, good news, God knows every secret. Good news, nothing is hidden from his sight. Good news, he knows your Binenleben better than you know your Binenleben. He knows your thoughts and anxieties and your shames and your lusts and your love. And guess what? He died for you. He knows it all, and he loves you. And that's a different way of reading those passages. One passage says, oh no, he knows me. And one passage says, yes, he knows me. And I hope we're that kind of church.